What do you think of when you heard the word voodoo? If you thought about this image, it means that you are trapped in the popular representation of voodoo. To comprehend the construction of its stereotype, it is necessary to understand its colonial past. Voodoo makes its way to the Americas in the 18th century with slaves that were brought from West Africa. In the context of the African diaspora, Haiti was one of the French colonies where slaves were brought to work on plantation and played the most significant role in the origin of voodoo. This religion is the result of Christianity mixing with African belief, based on ancestor worship and animism. After the expulsion of French colonizers from Haiti in the early 19th century, slaves established the first Black Republic. This freedom was short-lived, and in 1915 Haiti was occupied by the U.S. military force until 1934. Even though people did not use the term voodoo until the 20th century, as early as the late 19th century, magazine cartoons and newspapers depicted African people grotesquely and offensively. When United States forces occupied Haiti, a variety of new negative texts about voodoo arose, depicting Haitians as barbarian, dangerous voodooists, and incapable of self-rule. As a result, weird African rituals became a cultural obsession. The progression from page to screen of voodoo representation lie mainly in the horror genre. How we will see the cinematic representation of voodoo does not change significantly and remains based on colonial and racist prejudices. At the same time as American occupation of Haiti, the film The Birth of a Nation was released. This movie is significant because it is one of the first cinematic outcomes of colonialism. Even if it does not speak directly of Asian people and voodoo, it gives an idea of how Africans will be represented in voodoo movies. It endorsed white supremacy and introduced the theme of miscegenation in cinematic production. The movie is characterized by stereotyped characters such as the brutal black buck, which is an uncontrollable black man that desires to rape white women. The Birth of a Nation is full of racist inference. For instance, the role of some black characters is played by white people with black painted faces. The 1930s were characterized by issues of race, with the horror of miscegenation and widespread segregation, especially in the American South. White Zombie, released in 1932, is the first full-length voodoo film. Its setting drew inspiration from previous Gothic horrors such as Frankenstein and Dracula. This movie remarks on the racist attitude of the time and the feelings toward Haiti.
Haiti is full of nonsense and superstitions. They're always mixed up with a lot of mysteries that'll turn your hair gray.
Well, surely you don't think she's alive in the hands of natives? Oh, no, better dead than that.
Excuse me, please.
This sentence not only shows the fears towards the natives, but the term itself recalls the concept of the other. In the movie, voodoo is represented not by the verbal narrative, but by the visual symbolic narrative of dances, chanting, zombies, and voodoo dolls. White Zombie portrays voodoo as a harmful and heavy practice. However, it is one of the few films to connect zombies with voodoo and Haiti. The 1934 film Black Moon represents voodoo similarly to its depiction in late 19th century literature, not as a religion but as a practice of human sacrifices and frenzied dances. The movie dramatized the danger that whites encounter in confronting black African savagery.
Drums, the rada drums.
Rada drums.
Blood worship, sacrifice to the black gods.
In Black Moon, voodoo is represented as manipulative to the point that a mother can be convinced to kill her child for a sacrifice. In In 1940, the historical time of war has a great impact on film's production. Therefore, the subject matter of films differ, but is still based around a central voodoo theme. King of the Zombie, released in 1941, reflects the period's socio-political atmosphere by depicting a Nazi who makes use of the local voodoo priestess' power to try and elicit vital information from a captured American admiral. Additionally, he creates a horde of zombies that respond to his orders. In contrast with the previous colonial anxieties, new fears prevalent in the 1950s following millions of deaths, the atomic bomb and the Holocaust, influenced cinematic production. As a result, voodoo cinema shifts from the horror to the science fiction genre. The film Voodoo Woman from 1957 links voodoo with science. In a jungle setting, two men use white science and black voodoo to create an invincible creature. Imperialism prevails throughout the movie, and representation of voodoo ceremonies are stereotyped. Natives are represented in a very biased way, as hungry savages, bound from foot to foot, waving their lances and mentioning human sacrifice. The Zombies of Muratau, released the same year as Voodoo Woman, is one of the first attempts to eliminate the connection between zombies and voodoo. The public no longer fear death, but dehumanization. Zombies could provide the state of dehumanization without the need for voodoo. The 60s were a time of change, and cinema kept up with the times. The historical period is characterized by events such as the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, the beginning of the Cold War, and an increase in crimes and murders. Cinematic production saw an increase of sex, blood, violence, and nudity due to a decline in censorship. The term horror was also replaced with the term terror. Macumba Love, released in 1960, connects ritualistic murder with voodoo. The movie posters and trailers send a stereotype message, going farther from the real affiliation to the religion.
Bloodlust of the voodoo queen, wreaking a terrifying vengeance on those who disbelieve. The demon rites of the witch goddess, a spectacle of weird, shocking savagery in native jungle haunts. The most fantastic ritual ever filmed.
Night of the Living Dead, from 1968, is one of the most influential zombie movies ever made. This film transformed the living dead into flesh-eating creatures. It is the breaking point between voodoo and zombies, and recasts these creatures into contemporary society. However, the analysis of the modern zombie is not far from colonialism. Zombies became a metaphor for the savage and the cannibal odor. The 1970s were influenced by the immense social change and perceived crumbling of society that characterized the 1960s. A new genre of film emerged, portraying racial prejudices, the blaxploitation. This genre is characterized by African American cast and representation of urban stereotype crimes. In Scream Blackula Scream on 1973, voodoo is used to resurrect a vampire, and the voodoo doll is used to finally kill him. The other vampires recall a connection with zombies because of their static nature. As a consequence, vampirism is a metaphor for slavery. Sugar Hill, released in 1974, was the first blaxploitation film to feature zombies. After her fiance's murder, Sugar, the main character, asked Baron Samedi to assist her to revenge her dead lover. The divinity raises an army of the dead to help Sugar in accomplish her revenge. In the movie, zombies are slaves who die on their journey to the New World. Here, the connection with colonialism and the original meaning of the zombies is effective. Even if the viewer could sympathize with Sugar, They should still remember that voodoo is again used for a negative purpose, to take revenge and to kill through deathful practices. In the 1980s, big-budget films revived the voodoo theme, turning the subject into mainstream cinema. The 1987 film Angel Heart is one of the first voodoo horror movies of this generation. In the narration, voodoo is integrated with Satanism, even if it takes a secondary role. However, in Angel Heart, voodoo's representation is still rooted in colonialism terminology. The representation of the voodoo ceremonies are sensationalized by showing the blood-soaked and sinister side of the religion, as well as by representing the exotic odor and the sexual black savage woman stereotype. Even if the movie tried to distinguish voodoo from Satanism, at the end it reinforces the false connection between the two practices by portraying the voodoo priestess son with glowing yellow satanic eyes. By the 1990s, voodoo becomes a minor narrative element. As we transition into the 21st century, there is a revival in zombie movies characterized by slasher and comedy genre. Occasionally, we can also find a voodoo movie such as 2005's The Skeleton Key, which once again represents voodoo through the gothic atmosphere of earlier films. It makes an important distinction between hoodoo and voodoo, reflecting the importance of elements of voodoo religion such as the rituals of cleansing, magic bath, and herbal protection against evil spirits. However, the Skeleton Key increased the negative bias against voodoo by representing it as something of ghoulish. Through the decades, historical context has influenced voodoo's representation by adapting it to different historical necessities. However, even though voodoo's depiction changed throughout the times, it remains connected to its original colonial past. Voodoo carries stereotypes into the present day that belongs to imperialism, and these stereotypes are fixed in popular culture and difficult to extricate. Many of these movies show a cultural appropriation of this religion and depict it only as a harmful practice instead of portraying its real purpose and spirituality. Cinematic voodoo is the outcome of the fears caused by ignorance and prejudices that led to a misreading of voodooist rituals as something evil.
I didn't mean to do it. He told me to. I didn't mean to. No, please. No.